What's up, guys? Welcome into today's episode of Locked On Gamecocks. On today's show, we talk about the biggest reason for optimism in the 2024 season and one reason why that schedule isn't as daunting as people may think. Locked On Gamecocks starts right now.
You are Locked On Gamecocks, your daily podcast on the South Carolina Gamecocks, part of the Locked On Podcast Network. Your team every day.
What's up, guys? Welcome into Locked On Gamecocks. I am your host, Chris Marler. It's great to have you along. Thank you for making Locked On Gamecocks your first listen every day. Shout out to our everydayers. We are free and available wherever you get your podcasts and on YouTube, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. And today's episode is a very fun one. I'm excited to get to it. It is brought to you by our good friends at the Game Time app. Now, listen, the Game Time app is an authorized ticket marketplace of Major League Baseball, which makes getting tickets faster and easier than ever. Prices on the Game Time app actually go down as it gets closer to first pitch with killer last-minute deals, all-in prices, views from your seats, and their lowest price guarantee. Game Time takes the guesswork out of buying Major League Baseball tickets. Download the app now and use Locked On College for $20 off your first purchase. All right, let's get into the show. And we've got a fun one today. Listen, if there's anything you're going to learn about me over time, it's this, is I love a deep dive, and I love some positivity, and I love some optimism. I'm going to give you an objective take on everything that we talk about, but today's show is going to be about optimism. And there's a couple of things that I feel like people aren't addressing and talking enough about. And our first thing we're going to talk about is two position units, okay? Two position units in the first segment that we're going to discuss that I think aren't getting enough love to how much better they can be this year. And that's the offensive line and the defensive line. And when you talk about how things were a year ago, right, there were two position units I think that caused maybe the most, had the biggest detriment and biggest cause and negative effect on the season. That's the offensive line and defensive backs in the secondary, right? That offensive line, we'll start there. You talk about the fact that like you had maybe your most talented quarterback in program history in Spencer Rattler. Not saying he's the best, not saying he's the winningest, not saying anything like that. I know how everyone feels about Connor Shaw. I will never forget that name. Trust me. But from a physical trait standpoint, he's definitely the highest ranked recruit that's ever come through here, right? And you talk about from a physical tools and traits, like I just said, he's the most talented quarterback that's probably ever come through here, and definitely in the last very long while. Now, that being said, that guy was running for his life all the time last year, and he was behind an offensive line that was, if we're being honest, really bad. You know, it's an offensive line that ranked 11th or worse in the SEC for 3 of the last 4 years in terms of sacks allowed. It's just that kind of stuff is just not going to get it done. I think about when you talk about the offensive line then versus now, the things that affect you the most. I remember saying this when Spencer Rattler, I brought it up on yesterday's show, when he first came from Oklahoma to South Carolina, the biggest difference he was going to have was not the skill position guys, because we know how South Carolina can replace those guys. And the new names that you might not know at the end of last season and in spring ball, but by God, at the end of every fall schedule and fall season, you're going to know South Carolina has a guy that's going to be probably near the top of the SEC in terms of production at that position. But what Spencer Rattler was going to miss most from his jump from Oklahoma to South Carolina was the offensive line talent and the recruiting talent that they brought in at that position. Listen, if there's anything that I hate, right, this is another thing you'll learn about me. ISIS, yellow starburst, cliches. Hate cliches. But games are won and lost in the trenches, especially in the SEC. When you were at Oklahoma, that guy was behind an offensive line that had 11 players on that roster that were ranked a 4-star better. When he came to South Carolina, he only had 1 or 2 of those guys. I like the fact that Beamer has done a good job of getting in the portal. You brought in 3 guys specifically on the interior offensive line to kind of like, you know, strengthen and solidify the depth there. Maybe even contend for starting spot. But you've got 4 out of 5 guys returning. Now, granted, they're returning from an offensive line that definitely underperformed and underachieved. But from an experience standpoint, from a leadership standpoint, from a fact that you're in the SEC, you're on a baptism by fire type standpoint, where you're going in and you've got games started now coming back, I love that. Now, I keep saying, can they get better? The answer better be yes, because you couldn't get much worse from what you were a year ago. Again, I mean, you were ranked 11th or worse in the SEC in 3 of the last 4 years in terms of sacks allowed. That is not going to get it done. However, returning 405, having some more depth you brought from the transfer portal, bringing in one of your highest ranked recruits to compete on that offensive line as well. The most talented pieces of this offensive line are younger, for sure, but you've got some quality depth. And I throw out another cliche that I hate myself for saying, but I'll say it anyway. Iron sharpens iron, guys. And when you've got 9 guys competing for these spots, at the very least, you put yourself in a position where, man, we've got at least some guys that are talented finally going up against each other. Like it's one thing to have game reps. It's another thing to sit there and have practice day in and day out, because you only get 20 hours a week. Let's not forget the NCAA is somehow still a thing. You only get 20 hours a week. And you get to go up against better competition every single day. Love it. Love that. The other optimistic thing I'm going to tell you about this roster, and from a position unit standpoint, how about that secondary? That secondary was bad last year at times. Ranked 12th in the SEC in pass yards allowed, ranked 99th in the country in that same statistical category. Not going to get it done. There were times last year when it felt like that secondary was going to give up a big play, just like clockwork. That Mississippi State game, hard to watch. You put up 37 points and you had to fight tooth and nail to not give up more than 30. Like, just hard to watch. The secondary gave up a lot of big plays. But here's a situation where you're going in year 4 Beamer, and now you've got, not a ton of returning starters in the front 7. But when you're playing a 4-2-5 and a 3-3-5 and whatever schematically like you're going to throw out there for those 11 starters on defense, you're probably going to be in nickel and you're probably going to have 5 defensive backs. Love the fact that you got 4 or 5 coming back. Love the fact that you're letting the secondary and the back 7, right? We want to have the front 7 be good, and we'll see how that goes. You got to get better up front. You were last in the league in tackles for loss and sacks. Got to get better in the front 4. But that back 7, when you talk about 4 or 5 returning there as well, you can't get much worse than 12th in the SEC in terms of like in pass yards allowed. But the other part that people aren't talking about is, where do you get better? Because sure, you give up a ton of yards, but you're also 3rd in the conference in touchdowns allowed through the air, right behind the likes of teams like Georgia and stuff like that. How do you get better there? I think those are 2 position units that when you talk about as a South Carolina fan, someone watching this program, you're going into year 4, those 2 positions get better, kind of feel like they're destined to get better, right? Like they kind of feel like they're destined to get better. I'm excited to see it. I think that, again, you put that kind of experience out onto the field, it's going to be better to your conference. A testing point, a competitive point, team by team, roster by roster. You have a lot of big arms and how's the secondary going to react going into this year? How do they go from year over year? They have also improving some other turnover. You're 35th country last year in turnovers. With at +4, can you improve on that? +4 is not a crazy number. Can you improve on that, especially on the back end? Can you get some pass rush and get upfield and into that backfield and make that pocket collapse a little bit more so you can create even more turnovers? I would think so. And you talk about that offensive line, man, the opportunities, you're going to hear me say that word a lot today. The opportunity that's there for them, man. This is not to say anything negative about 4 players that have been here, because I've loved some of the recruits they've run, especially running back. It's like underrated guys all over the map. Kevin Harris was second in the conference in rushing in just 2020. Not to shade, but the guy in the backfield now is not a no better than South Carolina. Like, outside of maybe Delaware, like the University of Delaware, no one has recruited the state of Delaware better than South Carolina. Love to see it. I'm sure we have a huge contingent from Delaware watching the show. Love Dewey Beach. Spent many summers there. But I will tell you this. The guy you got back there now is not a running back by committee, plug and play, a blow, give that guy a breather, and then go get him out so he takes breath. Starting, that was just 2 years ago. Can you give that guy room? Can you open some holes? If you can't, special one back, and then that takes some pressure off you. And you start. You're going to get him and Robbie Ashford involved in some other, some trick play stuff and some things that are going to keep a defense on its toes. I love that, but it all starts up front. And when you've got 4 returning starters, the combined starts, the combined experience, the combined reps, the combined talent that should be better than it's been the last several years, you've got a situation where you could be a lot better than you were a year before. And that detriment becomes a positive from this year's team versus last year's team. All right, that is all for the first segment. Make sure you stay tuned after the break. We're going to get into our next segment. Talk about 2 games that aren't getting nearly enough love that I think could shape the entire season. And I'll tell you right now, the teams, it's Ole Miss and LSU. And we're going to get into why I think there's a very good opportunity for South Carolina to not only play in those games, but win those games. We'll get into that in the second segment. Before we start, guys, before we get into that part, I want to say once again, I'll tell you what, it's today's July 3rd, tomorrow's July 4th. Love going to see baseball games in the summer, even though it's 1,000 degrees here in Columbia. We'll go out and see the Fireflies and all that good stuff over here in Lexington. Love the fact that we get to have baseball games in the summer again. It is one of my favorite pastimes. I'll tell you what, one of my favorite memories of ever going to a game. I'm sure you guys all have this. For me personally, July 4th, 97. I'm old. That's a fun fact. I'm sure you can probably tell because I'm dead behind the eyes. But July 4th, 1997, I remember going with my dad on a baseball trip, father-son trip to Boston, Massachusetts, Fenway Park. We got to go to Fenway Park, a cathedral, one of the greatest sport stadiums, arenas, parks, however you want to phrase it, in the world. Got to go see Pedro Martinez pitch, sold out crowd, Fenway Park, July 4th in Boston, where the whole country started, basically. Got stuck behind a pole. I wish then we had the Game Time app back then, because it's the only ticketing app that gives you complete peace of mind with your purchase. You see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy. Would have loved to have known that, so I don't have to do this the whole time at 11 years old. That was a tough night. Especially, just ducking your head up behind a pole. If you've ever been to Fenway, you've ever been to Wrigley, you guys get it. But if the Game Time app, that doesn't happen. You can see the view from your seat on your phone before you buy. All-in pricing also shows your total cost up front. This isn't going to be like, when you're ordering groceries on an app where it's all of a sudden it's like a bazillion different fees that are going to be thrown in there. No, you get to see your all-in pricing up front as you purchase. Love that as well. You buy tickets in seconds with just 2 taps. Take the guesswork out of buying MLB tickets with Game Time. Download the Game Time app today, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Again, terms apply. Create an account, redeem the code LOCKEDONCollege. That's LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off. Download Game Time today. Last minute tickets, lowest price guaranteed. There you go. We're going to get to the second segment. And here's another thing you're going to learn about me. One, phenomenal speller. Just showed it to you. That's why I got second place in the 8th grade spelling bee. Thanks a lot, Kim O'Neill, because I misspelled haphazard with 2 Z's because I'm white trash, and was a big fan of the Dukes of Hazzard. But that's not either here nor there. Just trying to tell you guys a little bit about me. One thing about me that you will come to learn. I love a deep dive. Love getting into the numbers. I always say if we're going to talk about sports, we're going to talk about it with facts and objectivity, and we're going to get into factual numbers and statistics. I love a deep dive, and I did one today. And you want to talk about some optimism going into this year? There's not a ton of optimism from teams and national pundits around the country about this South Carolina team. Okay, a couple weeks ago, we talked with our friends at CBS. They came out with the over/under projections for each team in the SEC. What's the Vegas win total at for South Carolina? It's at 5.5. Is each team going to go over or under that total? South Carolina, they had going under. This is CBS Sports, right? By I think a significant amount. They had them going 4-8. 4-8. The over/under is at 5.5. Can Beamer get to 6 wins and get to bowl eligibility in year 4? We talked to our buddy Brad Crawford over at 24/7 Sports. I'm trying to pull up the tweet right now. And one of the things he had to say I thought was interesting was everyone kind of assumes that our dude Shane Beamer is on the hot seat, right? Like Jesse Simonton put out a thing the other day that he has the 5th most pressure on his job of any coach in the SEC. And I don't think that's necessarily wrong. But Brad Crawford responded to our buddies, one of my favorite Twitter handles of all time, Cox by 90. He says Shane Beamer is entering year 4 with 2 bowl appearances, a 5-7 record in year 3, but outside of a complete catastrophic season of 4-8 or worse, Beamer is safe. Brad Crawford says he agrees. That being said, there's some of the fan base will turn if there's a road egg laid in week 2 at Kentucky. Here's the thing that I keep looking at. You talk about the schedule. You'll hear me say this repeatedly. The schedule is the schedule, guys. There's not a player in that locker room and a coach in those offices that gives a blank about that schedule. Welcome to the SEC. Welcome to football. I don't give a blank again if Texas and OU are added to this conference. You think playing a tough schedule is something new to South Carolina? They do it every year. Every year. Georgia's on that schedule. Clemson's on that schedule. Georgia's not on the schedule this year. We're going to get to that in a second. But this isn't anything new to them. The schedule is the schedule. Line them up and let's play. Like, I don't think you're going to see anyone be super fearful of what they have coming in. You look at this year's schedule: Old Dominion, at Kentucky, LSU, Akron, Ole Miss. Then you get to October, right? You have that Ole Miss game at Bama, at Oklahoma. A&M at home kicks off November. Close with at Vandy, Mizzou, Wofford, and then at Clemson. CBS says you're going 4-8. 4-8. The only wins on that schedule from CBS's standpoint: Old Dominion, Akron, Vandy, Wofford. One SEC win. That's what CBS and the national media thinks of this South Carolina team. And I'm telling you right now, the schedule is the schedule. And when you look at it, I'm not saying that these 2 games are games that South Carolina's going to win, but when you look at LSU and Ole Miss, the opportunity there to win one of those games or both, I love it. I love it. LSU and Ole Miss are both very good programs. LSU is coming off of back-to-back 10-win seasons, a Heisman Trophy winner a year ago, 3 first-round draft picks. Brian Kelly, one of the better coaches, and I think more underrated coaches still somehow in all the country, right? Ole Miss coming off an 11-win season. They're preseason top 5 almost everywhere, right? Like, a lot of people think they're going to they're destined to make the playoff. I haven't seen a single person that's not in Garnet and Black, that's not in the 803 area code, that's not over in my 29072 zip code, outside of this area that's saying, I bet Carolina can win one of those games. Not a single person. Boy, that's a mistake. That's a mistake. Because you can talk about when Carolina's at its best is when you're laying in the weeds, right? And I think with those 2 games, those aren't insurmountable odds. Those aren't. I mean, I hate to say it, that's not Georgia. That's not Ohio State. That's not. I mean, like, who cares? Like. Those are 2 good teams. We don't know what they have coming back. And you get both of them at home. You look at the schedule as a whole. Here's who you lose. You lose Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. Traditional SEC East divisional rivals. I hate that you lose Florida in a year like this because you kind of feel like you can get one over on Billy Napier in that program right now. But you lose UGA and Tennessee, who I think are both destined to go to the playoff. I think, unpopular opinion, I think Tennessee is going to vie for a playoff spot this year. I think that's how good they can be with the talent they have on offense. UGA is not really going out on a limb by saying that they're going to compete and maybe win the national championship. But you lose Georgia, Tennessee, and Florida. Who do you gain? You gain LSU, Ole Miss, and Oklahoma. You get 2 of those 3 at home. Now, forget about Oklahoma for a second. You don't think there's a little extra juice in that game at the very least? With Beamer going back to where he was on staff? I like that. I like that a lot. So when you talk about going from that game aside, the other 2 that I keep pointing out to, LSU and Ole Miss, you get both of those at home. Why is that important? Now, again, Ole Miss is coming off of 2 10-win seasons in 3 years. Coming off 11 wins, like the most they've had since like JFK was president. Okay? LSU, Heisman Trophy winner. 2 10-win seasons, like I said, in Brian Kelly's first 2 years. But how do they play away from home? Because I've heard nothing but how great they are going into the season. How do those 2 teams play away from home? I'll answer my own question. LSU is 18-3. This is over the last 3 years. LSU is 18-3 at home. 18-3. 18-3 at home. Away from home, 8-11. 8-11. It's maybe the toughest place to play in the entire country at Death Valley at night, right? 18-3 in that place. 8-11 when you go on the road, when you get outside of Baton Rouge. Not as intimidating and terrifying as when they're at home, right? Same uniforms on the road at home. Not the same team. 18-3 at home, 8-11 on the road. Now you talk about Ole Miss. Ole Miss, you get a week off before you play Ole Miss. Ole Miss, their home and away record, 19-2 at home in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium over the last 3 years. 19-2. One of those losses to Bama. I can't remember who the other one was to. Away from home, 10-8. 10-8. So at home, when you're in front of 64,000 Vineyard Vine mannequins named Jace and Trent wearing Patagonia vests and comb-overs, you're fantastic. You're 19-2. What about when you get outside of Oxford? 10-8? Is that good? You're talking about two programs who are in the top 15 preseason, top 12 really preseason. A lot of people think that at least one of them, if not both, are going to get to the playoff. You get both them at home, and you're talking about two programs that are combined 5 losses at home in the last 3 years combined, but also combined under 500 when they go on the road. I love that. Again, I'm not saying it's a guaranteed win, but I'll tell you what it is. It's an opportunity. You get LSU early. It's a noon kick, and that sucks. One, because it's going to be 1,000 degrees that day. I'm going to have to bring 18 changes of shirts. But you don't think Williams-Brice can get up for that? Then you talk about the Ole Miss game? Ole Miss? Also, let's keep in mind, LSU at 11 a.m. kick is a fish out of water, man. Like that's not something they're used to, want to be a part of, or really thrive in those conditions. And again, 8-11 away from home. Early in the year, how's Nussmeier look? How do the new receivers look? How's the new defense look with the new defensive coordinator and 5 new defensive coaches? Is it improved? It better be. You got a great opportunity against LSU. And if you don't get that one, or you do get that one, then you got another great opportunity to kick off October, because you get a week off, and then you get Ole Miss, who we've seen what Lane Kiffin can do. He's a great offensive mind. Maybe, I think, one of the top 2 to 3 offensive minds in all of football at any level. That's an offensive-minded team. That's an offensive-minded coach. That's not a team that we've also seen be able to keep their composure for 12 to 13 straight games throughout a season and put things together. Like, you don't think it's a trap game on the road in Williams-Brice to kick off October? I do. And I'll tell you another thing. If you think the record wasn't bad enough, we talk incessantly about how great these teams are going to be. Oh, they're going to challenge for a playoff spot. Oh, my God, they had Jackson Dart coming back. Oh, my God, they had Lane Kiffin. Look at all these guys from the portal. I don't give a blank who they got on defense, because they're not going to play defense. They might get a little bit better. But I've seen Pete Golding in action in Tuscaloosa for a long time. It's the only person on the face of the earth that ever decided he was going to drop Will Anderson in coverage on 3rd down. Have at it, Hoss. Have fun. Make sure all those transfers somehow mesh together. We'll see. Should be good. If you don't think they're ripe for an upset on October 5th coming to Williams-Brice, you're wrong. And I'll tell you what, we talked about the road record, 19-2 at home, 10-8 on the road. How about that offense that you're going to hear so much about and already have? What do they do? I'm glad you asked. I'll answer that too. How about the fact that at home over the last 3 years, they put up an average of 39.6 points per game, nearly 40 points a game in Vaught-Hemingway Stadium. Love it. On the road, 12 points a game less, right? 27.6 on the dot, 12 points a game less, almost 2 touchdowns worth less on the road. That's over 3 years. You look at last year alone, it's almost 20 points. They average 44.1 points per game at home, 7 games at home, 44 points a game. On the road, 24.5. What happens when you leave that Vineyard Vine fest come to life in Oxford, and you got to go out on the road in the SEC to Lexington and Knoxville and Tuscaloosa and Columbia? It's not great. So statistically speaking, these are just the actual factual numbers of what these two programs have done, not in 1 year, over 3 years. Backing up to the COVID year, which we're not going to get into. 21 through 23, this is what these programs have been consistently over 3 years. You lose way more on the road, right? You put up way less points on the road, probably give up more points and yards on the road as well. Not the same team. Makes me feel like there's a massive opportunity for South Carolina in both of those. And I think those are 2 games that are being extremely overlooked. That is enough for segment 2. I am fired up, as you can tell. We're going to get into segment 3 here in a second, our last one today. And it's going to be a fun one. It's a mailbag from some of you guys sending in your favorite questions, stuff like that to get answered in the pod. We will get right back to it after this. All right, guys, welcome back. We're going to close out today's episode with 3 questions from the mailbag. We threw out on social media. Make sure you're following along Locked On SC on Twitter. We'll probably be a little bit more active on there because I spend way too much time on Twitter in general. So we'll be taking your questions. If you have any questions or topics you want to talk about, we still got about 60 days until the season starts. And this is y'all's show. This is y'all's show. I want to talk about what you guys want to hear about and talk about. So make sure you are sending in any questions like that. We have 3 questions from the mailbag. I keep saying it, the best 3 will make the show. Your very first one we're going to get to is from Elon Tusk, which is one of my favorite names already on Twitter. Elon Tusk says, if you had to put money on it, who will be the number 1 receiver by the end of the 2024 season? Now, listen, if I had to put money on it, I'm going to answer this in a way I kind of brought this up yesterday. I don't know if my head agrees with my heart on this one, but I'm going to say it anyway. It's Nick Harbor. There's not an athlete on this roster that rivals what that kid can do physically. And I think at least at the start, you don't have a guy on this roster that had from last year's team more than 12 receptions, right? Like you've lost a ton of production. Juice Wells gone, Xavier Leggett gone, Trey Knox gone. You've lost a lot of production and big targets. What does that also mean? You got a lot of opportunity. The word I keep using, you got a lot of opportunity going into this year. And if there's one thing, a track record that South Carolina has shown us over the last several years, there's going to be a guy. There's going to be a guy. It might not be, I'm trying to think of a good name. It's not going to be Devontae Smith, right? It's not going to be Jamar Chase. It's not going to be Justin Jefferson necessarily, but it's going to be a guy that's going to put up good numbers and be very productive in this offense. And we've seen it time and time again. Nobody knew who Josh Van's name was coming out of spring. You did by the end of the year. Xavier Leggett was not necessarily looked at as one of the top guys and going to be, at least from a draft standpoint, going into last season. Look at April, and all of a sudden he's got a number 1 next to his name, getting drafted in the first round. So who can that be? I think it's Nick Harbor. And there's other guys on this roster that I think maybe are a safer bet, but the money I would be putting down, because the return's going to be so great, is Nick Harbor. There's just not another person on this roster that has anywhere close to his physical abilities. 6'5", 240, one of the fastest people in the field. I say this about Jalen Milroe a lot from Alabama. The moment that kid steps on the field, he is the best athlete on the field, regardless of what sideline. Nick Harbor's that kind of guy. He's that kind of guy. So at the very least, I don't know if he's going to be your most productive receiver or receiver 1. He better get receiver 1 targets, though. You have got to give that kid the ball and put the ball in his hands and see what he can do. And maybe by the end of the year, he's not the guy. But I think if you're Shane Beamer and you're that offense, you have got to be you have got to put the ball in his hands as many times as possible. That's the first question from Elon Tusk. Next question is from our buddy. Oh boy, from our buddy David Carter. Sorry, bear with me here. He sends in a question and says, here's a question for the pod. What's the ceiling for South Carolina if Lenore Sellers balls out and the offensive line play is much improved from last year? Kind of what we talked about earlier, but what's the ceiling? Now, keep in mind, the scenario here is that Lenore Sellers balls out in year 1 as a starter and the offensive line plays much improved from last year. I think if you're talking about that's about as utopian as you can get and what the ceiling can be. 9-3, I think, is not out of the question. The schedule's still tough. We've already talked about it. I don't know what Bama's going to be. You're on the road against them and Oklahoma back-to-back. You've got Ole Miss, Bama. You got Ole Miss at home and then road games against Bama and Oklahoma back-to-back. There might not be a harder 3-game stretch in the country than those 3 games in a row for South Carolina. But if you're talking about what Lenore Sellers may be able to do, then yeah, I think if he can ball out, and especially in year 1, when there's not a lot of tape on this dude, we saw it last year. The numbers are very, very small in sample size, but 20 yards of completion, 10 yards of carry, very, very small sample size. But the kid can be explosive, and if he can ball out, and again, there's not a lot of tape on him. There's a ton of tape on Jackson Dart. There's a lot of tape on Jalen Milroe. You know what I mean? Like there's a lot of tape on Cade Klubnik. There's a lot of tape on Missouri from last year. I think the best case scenario is 9-3. I don't think it's that far fetched in that scenario. Now, our final question is from our good friend Hannah Bagnall. Hannah Bagnall from Atlanta, lifelong Carolina fan, sends this in. Also, just I'm biased because I know Hannah Bagnall, phenomenal real estate agent. Throwing that out there. No free ads, but there you go. She says, "What is your deal with not saying anything about your dog yesterday during your intro to the pod?" Doesn't really feel like a question. It feels like more of an attack. But yes, yesterday, if you missed the show, I did do a little introduction, tell you guys a little bit about me. Live in Lexington, South Carolina, have for quite some time. Mom's a pastor in Lexington, South Carolina. Sister graduated from USC in 2020. Dad ran the Alsco plant off of UG Street across from the baseball stadium for about 20 years until he retired. And the one other person in the family that I forgot to mention is sitting down here at my feet right now, being very good, by the way. And that is my corgi named Pepper. If you follow me on social media, Vern Funko CFP, you'll see a lot of Pepper. She's fantastic, big dog person. Not the dogs, but big dog person, especially corgi. So shout out to Pepper, shout out to Hannah Bagnall for the question. That is all for today's episode. I hope you guys have a fantastic rest of your night. I'm sorry for the getting us up late. It was a day trying to figure out the technology stuff, and Spectrum just did not want to be my friend today. I don't know why. So we will get that figured out. You'll have a episode that's released earlier in the day. Moving forward, I promise. I told you yesterday that I was always going to show up and work as hard as I could every single day. Not the same for my internet, apparently. But there's that. If you're going away for July 4th, please be safe. I said this. We want you guys coming back with 10 fingers and 10 toes, and unbridled enthusiasm going into the season. Unless you already don't have 10 fingers and 10 toes. If that's the case, then I apologize. If you have 9, 8, 7, 6, whatever the number is, we just want you coming back with the same amount of toes and fingers as you did prior to July 4th. So make sure you have a fantastic Independence Day. Be safe, make good decisions, all that good stuff. And finally, before we go, just remember this: Locked On has launched the first ever national sports 24/7 streaming channel on YouTube. It's now available on Amazon Fire TV in the free Fire TV Channels app. Locked On Sports Today is here for you 24/7, covering the top sports stories of the day with the local experts of Locked On, plus our national shows covering every single league on the face of the earth, really. Find Locked On Sports Today, now available on the free Fire TV Channels app. There you go. Guys, really appreciate it. Really appreciate all the support for the first couple of days. Can't wait to keep doing this every single day. We will see y'all tomorrow.